First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We have people from all corners of the world. I'm Mary Epazia, and with me is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham. We're all from Impact Planning Group. And the reason that we're conducting this short webinar is that we watch so many of our clients struggle with ways to work strategy and innovation. So what we've done is we've looked at the three most common traps and provided you with some very practical tips. These are actually quotes. This is how our clients have expressed it. And so the first is that we hear often is we're working on the trends, but we're not quite sure how to develop them the right way and then connect those to our innovation process. The second is that we know our customers and we know that we're trying to make sure that we're addressing their needs, but how do we make sure that we don't chase fads or end up focusing on things that are really like one-offs? So, and then that third is we're really busy. So how can we really focus in on the right innovations and make them a priority in our system? So what we're going to do now is Sean is going to take you through, and at the end we'll address the questions. So Sean?
Thanks, Mary. Thank you. So innovation is the action-related cousin of creativity. If creativity is having a new idea, then innovation is about implementing the ideas, the act of doing something new, something different that adds value. So when it comes to doing rather than just thinking, businesses can get into trouble. There's no doubt that the future belongs to the innovators, but the act of innovating is inherently risky. Failure is an option. In fact, it's a necessity. We literally learn from our mistakes, but there are some innovation failures that we can either mitigate or remove altogether. So we can accept and embrace failure of commission where we fail because we did something. We should refuse to accept a sort of failure of omission, failing because we didn't do something. And these following innovation traps are avoidable. First one is failing to spot trends. And there's no shortage of freely available data that helps us understand how the future may be different, but recognizing the important trends may be a problem. When Stephen Sassoon, who was an electrical engineer employed by Eastman Kodak in the mid-1970s, built the world's first digital camera, his bosses thought it was quirky and fun, but never thought the trend towards digital imaging was a game changer. They focused instead on making a clone of Polaroid's iconic instant camera, which a decision cost them a lawsuit in the short term and a whole lot more in the long term. Another failure mode is failing to translate trends into customer needs. Now, understanding cause and effect is vastly complex, but taxis and car services, for example, embraced mobile technology to have their drivers able to connect customers via the cell phone to advise if they were running late and so on. They also embraced the internet connectivity to enable the taking of credit card payments rather than just cash. And they embraced global positioning to use sat-nav to make their navigation easier. And they incrementally improved their business by adopting all these technologies. But it took an Uber to understand customer needs, to take the ability to order a car without a phone call, the knowledge of where the car was so they could anticipate arrival and not stress that the car would be late or not turn up at all. And the advanced knowledge of the likely fare, the automatic payment system, and so on. Now, it often takes this outsider view to match latent and changing needs with the trends. Most of us see trends from our perspective, not the customers. So we get a 10% improvement, not the 10 times improvement. So we often miss the disruptive innovations. Finally, there's a failure of moving too slowly. Best is the enemy of the better. Too often, we want to launch a perfect solution than launch a good product and improve it incrementally. Now, collaborative innovation is the key. The old mindset that we'll launch our product when it is ready will leave you vulnerable to a nimble competitor who asks customers, what do you think of this? How can we make this better? As an example, we work with a business in the oil and gas industry who had developed an innovative metering valve. It saved a lot of downtime for oil companies, but the company held back releasing it because they wanted to wait till it was perfect. It took 2 years of ongoing testing and refinement before they were ready. And when they were ready to launch, a small startup had beaten them to it. Now they dropped their product and bought the startup instead, and they really didn't have to. In some cases, slow and steady doesn't always win the race. But that's enough about the what. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tom to talk more about the how.
Thanks, Sean. So let's look at some keys to success in avoiding these trends. As Sean said, it's not an issue for most of our clients to keep up with trends. With freely available information, most companies, if they make the commitment, can stay up with all or most of the trends that are going to impact their business. Where we see a big mistake, a big miss, is where companies don't have a mechanism for aligning on which of those trends that they're monitoring are going to really impact their business. Now, the framework that you can see on the left-hand side of the page is something that I will explain later in a few minutes. But it is a framework that one of our famously innovative clients, when they saw it, agreed that it was the missing link to a recent innovation failure that they had had. This client was in the food business. And as a company, they did agree that there was a trend in the food business towards taking foods that used to have some form of preparation and making them and packaging them as ready to eat right from the get-go. This company knew that trend was happening in the food business, but in their segment, there was a lot of disagreement in their company that their segment and their customers would want ready-to-eat foods. Some people in the company said, yes, absolutely, we've got to innovate in this area. Other people in the company said, no, it's not important. Our customers don't want that. This led to indecision and inaction. And some of this company's competitors, including BeachNet, whose product we're showing on the screen here, came out with ready-to-eat packaging that addressed the trend and stole significant market share from this company. And our client, again, is very innovative in many other ways, is still recovering from this. Had they used the framework on the left, and many of our clients that use this framework that I'm now going to explain, lower the probability of ever missing an important trend. This is a framework for taking all the trends that a company is monitoring and agreeing on which ones really are relevant and which ones should be innovated against, if you will. The process works like this. You get a bunch of cross-functional but experienced industry people together to review the trends. And then they come to some consensus on which trends really are going to matter. Now, it may sound like this might water down, this consensus approach might water down and cause you to miss more trends, but in our experience and in the experience of the clients that use this particular tool, there's some kind of a wisdom of crowds element that enables them to use this consensus to not miss trends. They find it very highly predictive of which trends are going to impact in the industry. So here's how it works. Each of the circled numbers represents a trend. And this cross-functional group rates each trend on its probability of occurrence on the x-axis and magnitude of effect on the y. And when they come to an agreement then, the ones, especially number 1 and number 4, the ones in the green on the right-hand side, are the obvious ones to try to create innovative products and services to address. But number 5 is kind of interesting as well, because number 5 has a lower probability of occurrence, but the highest magnitude of effect if it does indeed happen. And so companies that use this also create contingency or scenario plans against the probability of number 5 happening, so they're ready if it indeed does happen. So trend alignment is really important. It's actually necessary, but it's not sufficient. The key to avoiding trap number 2 that Sean talked about is taking those trends that the company agrees are going to be important and figuring out how they're going to impact customer needs. This might sound really straightforward and obvious, but it's our experience that many companies make erroneous assumptions how a trend is going to impact their customers. And when many organizations in the same industry make that erroneous assumption, it opens the door for the one company that does have the insight on how a trend is truly going to impact customer needs to create innovations that are highly disruptive and highly successful. This is just an excerpt that you see on the page of our trend translation tool, where we help clients not only identify the trends, but in the middle of all this, ask a number of why-oriented questions to try to come to some insight on the right-hand side. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about, where assumptions open the door for a company that found insight. And it's related to row number 1, by the way, on this framework. Back in the early 1990s, the early days of this technological age that we all live in, people were just beginning to feel the effects of a sped-up lifestyle. They were starting to get harried and overwhelmed and looking for escapes. And the way that most retailers, including book retailers, reacted to this was that they assumed that this meant that they had to sterilize their operational experience for these overwhelmed customers. They had to streamline selections. They had to add checkout lines. They had to get people in and out of the store really, really quick. And many, many bookstores bought into this assumption too. But one bookstore owner, a guy named Leonard Riggio, noticed that people were still lingering in his stores. They were spending a lot of time in his stores. They didn't seem to be in any hurry. So he began asking a series of why questions about this particular trend. Here's what he found out. He found out that, yes, indeed, his best customers were feeling overwhelmed, hurried, and harried. But they didn't want a sterilized experience coming into the bookstore because the bookstore was actually part of their entertainment. They looked at that retail experience as an entertainment experience. So what did Leonard Riggio do? He embraced that concept. He innovated by putting comfortable chairs and comfortable couches and coffee bars into his bookstores. You might be able to guess that Leonard Riggio was the owner and founder of Barnes & Noble. And because of this insight of anticipating customer needs differently than competitors did, he was able to innovate in a completely different way, and in a way that really, better than any other bookstore, staved off the competition of Amazon that was to kill many of his other competitors in his industry. So not only is it important, key number 1, to align on trends as a company, but number 2 is to find insight to anticipate how those trends are going to impact customer needs. The third thing is, Sean said earlier, the best is the enemy of the better when it comes to innovation. Our experience of observing many of our B2B clients in slow-moving, long sales cycle, long product life cycle businesses is that they tend to want to, A, get their prototypes perfect before they show them to customers, and B, they tend to want to wait for output metrics, sales, market share. They want to wait for a full turn of their sales cycle before they decide if their prototypes are working, and it is just too darn slow. The clients that are doing that are being disrupted by innovative, indirect competitors that they didn't even know existed a few months or even a few weeks ago. So what we tend to do is use the 2 tools, excerpts of the 2 tools that are on my page here, the types of pilots, the pilot tool on the left, is a way that we try to inspire B2Bs to move faster with their prototypes, to try not to get them perfect. We show them examples and ways of developing pilots that they can conceive of that worked for companies in other industries that they can make their own. For example, Dropbox. Dropbox, before their owner made any significant investment in developing the Dropbox software, he created a video that showed the features and functions that he planned to put into the ultimate product, and showed that to as many people as they could, and got so much positive feedback and so many improvement pieces of advice that he was able to find a significant number of investors to go ahead and develop the actual product. Zappos and Food on the Table were two other examples that you could look up of creative concepts on getting prototypes to market very, very quickly. And in fact, one of our industrial clients was so motivated by hearing this story about Dropboxes that they designed a market simulator to get a year's worth of experience in a couple of hours from their clients in simulating different decisions that the clients that use their industrial machinery would have to make throughout the course of the year to try to speed up getting this reaction and this feedback with a simple prototype. On the right side is an excerpt from our metrics tools. Output measures are the sales and market share data that take too long to get, especially in slow sales and product lifecycle businesses. What we see in our B2B clients that are moving fast enough is they're getting comfortable with intermediate metrics to decide whether their prototypes and their innovations are making a positive impact in the market. These intermediate metrics, like the ones you see on the screen for the pharmaceutical industry, they don't tell us how are we doing with our new ideas. They tell us how we seem to be doing. And in fact, we all would like to know how we are doing with an innovation concept, with a test market, before we move forward. But that's too darn slow. We've got to be comfortable with how we seem to be doing, measures that tell us how we seem to be doing, to move to the next stage of investment in these imperfect prototypes to get them closer and closer to the ultimate product. So moving fast, making sure that the best is not the enemy of the better is key number 3, to go along with key number 1, aligning around trends as a company, and number 2, gaining insights into how those trends are going to impact your customers. We think those are 3 disciplines that the companies that we work that are having success with innovation are utilizing, and we think that if you utilize these 3 disciplines in your organization, you'll definitely raise your probability of success with your innovations and your innovation program. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary to wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, thank you. We hope that you have heard a couple of things that you're actually going to be able to apply back to your businesses. If you're interested in hearing more or seeing more, there's 3 more things that we can provide. You can go to our website, The Accidental Marketer, and Tom has just written a great article on 10 innovation approaches you may want to check out. We would be more than happy to talk with you and your team about some of your specific innovation traps and start to brainstorm on what are some things you may try to address those with. And then the third thing, which many of you already know we do and we love doing, is conducting some type of a cross-functional innovation workshop. As Tom said, there's a lot of tools that very quickly help us get a team talking together and moving forward. So the next slide, what you see is, for example, these are the types of things, if we were to work with you on a workshop, we would address those trends that both Sean and Tom talked about, and then help you answer the question of so what, the implications to customers, and then what does that mean to their needs, and then get very creative around what are ways that we can do this better, different than our competitors, and then moving fast, of course, is the action plan. And there are going to be things that we need to discover more, which is what we call the wish we knew. So it doesn't stop you, as Tom's describing, but rather you keep moving forward. So with that, we want to thank you very much for joining us on this webinar, and we'll go ahead and open this up to questions.